In every small town, there's always someone people look up to. Someone they trust. Someone they believe could never do any wrong. In the quiet, peaceful town of Orofino, Idaho, that someone was Sheriff William Douglas. He wasn't just the law. He was a friend, a neighbor, a protector. He was the man people called when they were in danger, the man who waved at kids on their way to school, and the man who seemed to embody everything good about their little corner of the world. But the truth about Sheriff Douglas was far darker than anyone could have imagined. Behind the shiny badge and warm smile was a man harboring a secret so disturbing, so unthinkable, that when it finally came to light, it shattered the trust of an entire community. You see, Sheriff Douglas wasn't just the trusted lawman of Orofino. No, he was also a man who had fallen into a forbidden and dangerous relationship with a girl half his age, a 17-year-old high school senior named Amanda Edwards. She was young, vulnerable, and full of dreams, but she'd made the mistake of trusting the wrong man. A man who should have protected her, a man who, instead, took advantage of her innocence. At first, their secret affair was nothing more than whispers in the shadows, midnight phone calls, secret meetings in places no one would think to look. Amanda was drawn in by his charm, his authority, and the promise of something more exciting than her quiet life at home. And Douglas? He was intoxicated by the thrill of control. He knew it was wrong, he knew it was dangerous, but he felt untouchable. After all, who would ever suspect the sheriff? But secrets like these never stay buried for long. And as Amanda began to realize the true danger she was in, the relationship spiraled into something far darker. Desperation, betrayal, and then murder. It started with a single 911 call. Amanda's parents, frantic and heartbroken, reported her missing. They said she'd never come home after a night out with friends. The town rallied together to search for her, neighbors combing the woods, volunteers putting up flyers. But as the hours turned into days, hope began to fade. And then the unthinkable happened. Her body was found in a shallow grave on the outskirts of town. She was bruised, broken, and lifeless. The kind of crime that leaves a scar on a community forever. But what shocked everyone even more than the discovery of Amanda's body was the discovery of who was responsible. For this was no question of murder, the deadliest crime. Sheriff William Douglas, the man who swore an oath to protect and serve, was now the prime suspect in her brutal murder. The man who had symbolized safety and justice had betrayed everything he stood for. And as the investigation unraveled, so did the horrifying details of their relationship, the lies he told to cover his tracks, and the cold, calculated way he tried to bury both the truth and Amanda herself. How did a man entrusted with so much power fall so far? What really happened in those final moments between Amanda and the sheriff? And most importantly, could this entire tragedy have been avoided? This is the story of a small-town sheriff, a vulnerable teenage girl, and how their dark affair ended in betrayal, deception, and murder. It's a story of power, manipulation, and the devastating consequences of secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling case of Sheriff William Douglas and Amanda Edwards, a story that shook an entire town to its core. Our story takes place in the picturesque town of Orofino, Idaho, a quiet, peaceful place nestled in the embrace of rolling hills and thick forests. It's the kind of town where the air feels fresher, where neighbors greet each other by name, and where life moves just a little bit slower. In Orofino, everyone knows everyone. It's a place where trust is sacred, and the people you see every day, the teacher at the school, the cashier at the grocery store, or the sheriff patrolling the streets, are more than just faces. They're friends, family, and part of the very fabric of the community. At the heart of this small town was Sheriff William "Bill" Douglas. To the people of Orofino, he wasn't just the sheriff, he was a symbol of safety and justice. He was the man you'd call when something felt wrong, the man you'd see volunteering at charity events, the man who would smile and wave as he drove by in his patrol car. With over 20 years in law enforcement, Sheriff Douglas had built a reputation as a strong, dependable leader, a man who seemed to embody everything a lawman should be. But even in a small town like Orofino, appearances can be deceiving. Behind his badge, behind that warm, reassuring smile, Sheriff Douglas held a secret so dark, so vile, that if the townspeople had known, their trust in him would have shattered like glass. You see, while the town saw a hero, a protector and a family man, there was another side to Sheriff Douglas, a side that few would ever have suspected. A side that rendered Sheriff Douglas closer to a hero, a protector and a family man than he would ever have been before. And then there was Amanda Edwards. Amanda was just 17 years old, a high school senior, full of dreams and potential. She was the kind of girl who loved to spend hours wandering the woods with her camera, capturing the beauty of the world around her. Amanda wanted to be a photographer, to see the world beyond Orofino, and to use her lens to tell stories. But life hadn't always been easy for her. She'd been rebellious and self-conscious. Home, things were complicated. Strained relationships with her parents, arguments that left her feeling unseen and unheard. Like so many teenagers, Amanda felt trapped, like no one really understood her. And that's when she met him. Sheriff Douglas, a man decades her senior, a man who seemed to see something in her that no one else did. He wasn't just the sheriff. To Amanda he became a friend, a confidant, and eventually much more. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't have realized, was that this relationship wasn't about love or connection. It was about power, and Douglas, with all his authority and charm, knew exactly how to manipulate her vulnerability. At first their interaction seemed innocent enough, a casual hello at the diner, a friendly question about how school was going. But soon their conversations became longer, more personal. Late-night phone calls turned into secret meetings. To Amanda, it felt exciting, like she was finally being noticed, finally being appreciated. But to Douglas, it was something far more sinister. He was a man who believed he could get away with anything. The people of Orofino had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. To them, Sheriff Douglas was still the dependable lawman they'd always known. And Amanda? She was just a teenager trying to find her way in the world. But the truth was far more complicated. Because what started as a forbidden affair would soon unravel into something far darker. Something that would leave Amanda's family devastated, the town in shock, and the man they trusted most exposed as a predator and a killer. Orofino was the kind of place where people believed they were safe, but as this story would prove, even the most trusted faces can hide the most dangerous secrets. It all began so innocently, or at least that's how it must have seemed at first. A chance meeting at a small-town diner. Amanda Edwards, just 17 years old, was sitting alone in a corner booth, sipping her soda and scribbling in her notebook. She was a dreamer, always jotting down ideas for her photography or planning her escape from someone like her. That's when Sheriff William Douglas walked in. He wasn't in uniform that day, just an ordinary man grabbing a cup of coffee. But even without the badge, his presence commanded attention. He noticed Amanda sitting there quietly and struck up a conversation. At first it was harmless, a friendly exchange, the kind you'd expect from someone like him. Amanda was polite but shy, unsure why the town's beloved sheriff would be talking to her. But Douglas had a way of putting people at ease. He asked her about school, her photography, and her plans for the future. And somehow, in that brief encounter, Amanda felt seen. For a teenage girl struggling with family drama and a deep sense of loneliness, that moment of attention must have felt like a lifeline. But what Amanda didn't know was that this wasn't just an innocent conversation. To Sheriff Douglas, it was something more. A carefully calculated opportunity. He saw her vulnerability, her need for validation, and he knew exactly how to exploit it. After all, he wasn't just a man. He was a man with decades of experience in reading people, in knowing how to gain their trust. And Amanda? She never stood a chance. What started as casual hellos soon became longer conversations. Douglas would find excuses to run into her, at the diner, at the park, even near her high school. He'd offer her rides home, telling her it wasn't safe to walk alone. At first, Amanda hesitated. She knew it wasn't normal for a man his age to take such an interest in her. But he was the sheriff. He was someone the whole town trusted. Why shouldn't she? Over time, the relationship deepened. It wasn't long before Douglas began calling her late at night. At first, the calls were innocent, questions about her day, advice on how to deal with her parents. But soon, they turned into something else. Douglas would tell her how beautiful she was, how mature she seemed for her age, how special she made him feel. To Amanda, it felt like she was living in a dream. Someone finally understood her, finally cared about her in a way no one else ever had. When it is ended, she braces her books, when she is ready, with eagerness for the night. But this wasn't a love story. It was a dangerous game. And Douglas, with all his authority and charm, was the one holding the cards. He told Amanda they had to keep their relationship a secret. He said people wouldn't understand, that they'd judge her, even hurt her. And Amanda, young and naive, believed him. She began sneaking out at night, meeting him in secluded spots far from town. He would pick her up in his car, drive her to the woods, or to an empty cabin he claimed no one else knew about. These meetings, these moments, became their secret world. A world where Amanda thought she was safe, but in reality she was anything but. Douglas, of course, had everything to lose. A man in his position, involved with a teenage girl, it would destroy his career, his family, his reputation. And yet, he couldn't stop. The thrill of it, the control he had over her, it was intoxicating. But secrets like this don't stay hidden forever. And as the months went on, the cracks in their fragile world began to show. Amanda was changing. At first she was captivated by Douglas's attention, but soon she began to see him for who he really was. Controlling, manipulative, dangerous. She started pulling away, questioning the relationship, and even threatening to tell someone. Maybe it was a moment of courage, or maybe she was just desperate to escape. But whatever her reasons, that decision would seal her fate. When Amanda told Douglas she couldn't do it anymore, his reaction wasn't what she expected. He didn't beg or plead. Instead, he became cold, distant, and then angry. He reminded her of his power, of everything he'd done for her. He told her that if she exposed their relationship, no one would believe her. After all, he was the sheriff. She was just a troubled teenage girl. And yet, Amanda stood her ground. She wanted out. She wanted her life back, but Douglas wasn't about to let that happen. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Amanda confided in a friend, telling her that Douglas was becoming increasingly erratic. She said he'd been calling her constantly, showing up outside her house at odd hours, and even threatening her. She was scared, but she wasn't sure what to do. And then, just like that, she was gone. On a cold November night, Amanda left her house for what her parents thought was just another evening out with friends. But she never came home. Her phone went silent. Her friends hadn't seen her, and the last person anyone could remember her being with was Sheriff William Douglas. The town was in shock. How could a girl like Amanda just vanish without a trace? Her family was frantic, pleading with anyone who would listen to help find her. And Douglas, he played his part perfectly, offering to help with the search, comforting her parents, and assuring everyone that he'd do everything in his power to bring her home. But behind the scenes, he was panicking, because Douglas knew the truth. He knew Amanda wasn't coming home, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the walls started closing in. The clock was ticking, and as the hours turned into days, Amanda's parents were frantic with worry. They had always trusted their daughter to be responsible, to check in, to come home when she said she would. But this time, something felt different. Amanda had always been a bright light in their lives, and now that light had gone out. On that cold November night, they reported her missing to the local authorities, hearts heavy with fear and dread. As the news spread through Orofino, the community rallied together. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers joined the search efforts, hoping to find Amanda safe and sound. But as they combed the woods, local parks, and familiar places, whispers began to circulate. Witnesses started coming forward, recalling the last time they saw Amanda. Several people reported seeing her chatting with Sheriff Douglas outside a gas station just hours before she vanished. The sheriff, the very man who was supposed to protect her, was now a figure of interest. His interest in her was ancient, a secret truth that she had never let. It was a source of great pride and longing, like the scent of good food. When confronted by investigators, Douglas dismissed any involvement with a casual wave of his hand and a confident smile. "I barely knew her," he said, shrugging off the allegations as if they were nothing more than a misunderstanding. But behind that calm facade, something was brewing. Investigators sensed that Douglas wasn't telling the whole truth. They could feel the weight of his secrets pressing down on them, like a storm gathering strength on the horizon. Days turned into a week, and then, just when hope seemed to be waning, came the devastating news that would change everything. The search team, combing deeper into the woods, discovered a shallow grave. When the authorities unearthed Amanda's body, it was a moment that would forever haunt the town of Orofino. She was gone, taken too soon, and the signs of foul play were unmistakable. An autopsy would later reveal the horrifying truth. Amanda had been strangled. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, a collective gasp of disbelief echoing through the streets. This was a town that prided itself on safety, and now they were faced with the grim reality that a predator was among them. But the biggest twist was yet to come. As investigators began piecing together the timeline of Amanda's last days, they stumbled upon something that would change the direction of the investigation entirely. Digging into Amanda's phone records, they opened a Pandora's box. Hundreds of messages exchanged between her and Douglas revealed a secret affair filled with passion, manipulation, and fear. The messages told a story of a young girl caught in a web far too complicated for her to escape. One particularly chilling excerpt stood out. Douglas had written, "No one can ever know about us. My life depends on it." These weren't the words of an innocent man. They were the frantic pleas of someone who knew he had something to lose. As the investigation deepened, more witnesses began to come forward, each with their own piece of the puzzle. A close friend of Amanda revealed that she had confided in her about the affair, expressing her fears about Douglas's increasingly controlling behavior. "He was obsessed with her," the friend would later say, her voice shaking with emotion. She felt trapped, like he had this hold on her that she couldn't shake off. Another witness emerged, claiming they had seen Douglas's car parked near the burial site on the night Amanda went missing. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they painted was chilling. With each revelation, the community's shock turned to anger, and the once beloved sheriff found himself at the center of a storm he could not control. The facade of trust he had built over years was crumbling, and the truth was finally surfacing. As investigators continued to dig deeper, they uncovered a web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal that would lead them to question everything they thought they knew about the man they had once regarded as a hero. The investigation was far from over, and with each new lead, the stakes grew higher. For Amanda, it was too late. But for Sheriff Douglas, the walls were closing in. Just when it seemed like the case couldn't get any darker, the investigation took a turn that no one could have predicted. The sheriff, the man everyone had trusted for decades, was already under intense scrutiny. But what happened next would flip the story on its head and leave the entire town of Orofino in utter disbelief. As investigators continued to dig deeper into the case, an unexpected whistleblower came forward. Someone no one would ever have suspected. It wasn't a neighbor or a friend or even a colleague. No, it was someone much closer to Douglas, someone who had been living under the same roof as him for years. It was his wife, Mary Douglas, a name that had always been whispered with respect and admiration in the community. She was known as the quiet, supportive woman who stood by her husband, the sheriff, through thick and thin. But Mary wasn't the woman people thought she was, and as the weight of the investigation bore down on her family, she made a decision that would change everything. It started with something small, a nagging suspicion. Mary had noticed Douglas acting strange in the days following Amanda's disappearance. He was restless, pacing the house late at night, jumping at every sound. She had seen him like this before, but never this bad. Then there were the clothes. One night, after Douglas had come home unusually late, she spotted him slipping into the laundry room with a bundle of clothes in his hand. She didn't think much of it at first, but when she went to check on the laundry the next morning, those clothes weren't there. Mary's curiosity got the better of her. She began looking through the house, searching for answers to questions she didn't even know she had. And then she found it. Hidden in the corner of their garage, stuffed inside a box of old tools, was a shirt. But this wasn't just any shirt. It was Douglas's shirt, the one he had been wearing on the night Amanda went missing. And it wasn't clean. The once crisp fabric was smeared with dark, dried stains. Mary froze. Her mind raced as she stared at the shirt, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, that this wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, she knew. She knew something was terribly, horribly wrong. When she confronted Douglas that night, his reaction was nothing short of chilling. At first, he denied everything. He said the shirt had nothing to do with Amanda, that she was imagining things, that she should just leave it alone. But when Mary pressed him further, when she refused to back down, Douglas cracked. In a moment of panic, he confessed. He told her it was an accident, that he never meant for it to happen. He begged her to keep quiet, to let it go, to protect the family. But Mary couldn't shake the image of Amanda's face on the news, the tears of her parents, the pain of a town that had lost one of its own. For days she wrestled with the truth. She loved her husband. They had built a life together, raised children, shared memories. But how could she stay silent, knowing what he had done? How could she protect a man capable of such a monstrous act? The weight of it all was too much to bear. So, Mary made the hardest decision of her life. She went to the authorities. When Mary walked into the sheriff's office that morning, it was as if the air in the room shifted. She was pale, trembling, but determined. She handed over the bloody shirt without a word, her hands shaking as she placed it on the desk, and then she told them everything. She recounted the nights of pacing, the hidden shirt, and her husband's chilling confession. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The evidence Mary provided was damning. The blood on the shirt was a match for Amanda's DNA, and her testimony painted a picture of a man unraveling under the weight of his own guilt. In an instant, public opinion turned. The man who had once been a pillar of the community was now its greatest disgrace. The whispers in the streets grew louder. The trust people had placed in Douglas was shattered. replaced by anger, betrayal, and a deep, burning need for justice. Mary's decision to come forward wasn't just a betrayal of her husband. It was a betrayal of everything she had built with him, everything she thought she knew about their life together. But in the end, it wasn't just about her. It was about Amanda, about the truth, and about a town that deserved to know the kind of man who had been hiding behind that badge for so long. For the investigators, Mary's testimony and the bloody shirt were the missing pieces they needed to move forward. The walls were closing in on Douglas, and there was no escape. But even as the case seemed to be reaching its climax, the shadow of his betrayal loomed large over the town, leaving scars that would never fully heal. As the evidence mounted against him, it became clear that Sheriff William Douglas could no longer hide from the truth. The walls were closing in, and the community that once revered him was now turning against him. It wasn't long before the authorities made their move. On a chilly morning, as the sun barely peeked over the horizon, Douglas was arrested and charged with the murder of Amanda Edwards. The news of his arrest spread like wildfire through Orofino, leaving the town in shock. How could the man they had trusted, their protector, be capable of such a horrific crime? The media descended upon the small town, transforming it into a circus of flashing cameras and reporters clamoring for answers. This was not just a local story. It was a sensational tale of betrayal and tragedy that captivated audiences across the nation. The trial promised to be explosive, filled with shocking revelations and emotional testimony, and everyone wanted a front-row seat. The crowd separated when Julia arrived. As the courtroom filled with spectators, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The prosecution wasted no time in painting a vivid picture of Douglas as a manipulative predator, someone who had exploited his position of power to prey on a vulnerable teenager. They described how he had lured Amanda into a web of deceit, how he had taken advantage of her trust, and ultimately, how he had silenced her when she dared to threaten his carefully constructed world. Key evidence was presented that would leave the jury and the public reeling. The text messages exchanged between Douglas and Amanda were laid bare for all to see. Each message revealed the depth of their relationship, but more importantly, they exposed the power imbalance that existed. One message stood out. "I can't let anyone know about us. My life depends on it." Those words echoed in the courtroom, a chilling reminder of the lengths Douglas would go to protect himself. Then there was the bloody shirt, provided by his wife Mary, a piece of evidence that was both damning and heartbreaking. It was the physical manifestation of Douglas's betrayal, a symbol of a life lost and trust shattered. And finally, Amanda's diary was introduced, her personal thoughts, a window into her world, detailing her growing fear of Douglas in the weeks leading up to her death. "I feel trapped," one entry read. "I don't know how to escape him." The jury listened in rapt attention, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. In contrast, Douglas's defense was weak and shaky. He claimed he was being framed, insisting that Amanda's death was merely a tragic accident that spiraled out of control during an argument. He painted himself as a victim, a man who had loved a troubled girl but never intended for things to end the way they did. "This is not a murder case," he argued. "This is a tragic misunderstanding." But his words fell flat. The jury wasn't convinced. They could see through the facade he had built, the lies he had told, and the manipulation that had defined his relationship with Amanda. "Let us hear from the judge," said Brian. As the trial wore on, the evidence continued to stack up against him, and the tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch. Each witness who took the stand further cemented the prosecution's case, bringing to light the darkness that had lurked beneath the surface of Douglas's charming exterior. The townspeople watched in disbelief as the man they had once trusted was slowly unmasked, revealing a predator lurking behind the badge. The emotional toll on Amanda's family was palpable as they sat through the trial, reliving the nightmare they had lived since their daughter's disappearance. They were there for every testimony, every piece of evidence, every moment that pulled them back into their grief. They wanted justice, not just for Amanda, but for every girl who might ever find herself in a similar situation. Finally, after weeks of testimony, the jury was ready to deliberate. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Would they see Douglas for who he truly was? Would they deliver justice for Amanda? The answer would forever change the lives of all those involved and the fabric of the community that had once trusted him. As they filed out of the courtroom, the world held its breath, waiting for the verdict that would determine Douglas's fate and the story of Amanda Edwards. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric as the jury returned to deliver their verdict. After weeks of tension, heartbreak, and revelations that had shaken the foundations of Orofino, everyone held their breath, waiting for the decision that would change everything. When the foreman stood to read the verdict, the silence was deafening. "We, the jury, find the defendant, William Douglas, guilty of first-degree murder." In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, and a wave of emotion washed over Amanda's family. Tears streamed down their faces as the weight of the verdict sank in. Justice had finally been served. But it came at a cost that would never fully heal the wounds left by Amanda's tragic death. Douglas was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate that seemed both fitting and heartbreaking. The man who once wore a badge of honor would now wear an orange jumpsuit for the rest of his days, a constant reminder of the life he had taken and the trust he had shattered. But as the dust began to settle, the fallout from the trial was palpable. The town of Orofino found itself divided. Some residents still clung to the belief that Douglas was innocent, that he had been framed by a system that had turned against a beloved figure. They couldn't fathom how he could have done such a thing, how the man they had trusted could betray them in such a horrific manner. Others, however, were disgusted by the betrayal of a man who had sworn to protect them. They felt anger and betrayal, not just for Amanda, but for themselves. How could they have been so blind to the darkness that lurked beneath the surface? How could they have been so deceived? The community was left grappling with questions that seemed impossible to answer. How do you reconcile the image of a trusted sheriff with the reality of a murderer? How do you heal a community that has been so deeply wounded? These weren't just abstract questions, they were the daily struggles of the people of Orofino, as they tried to reclaim their sense of safety and trust. In the aftermath, Amanda's family became vocal advocates for change. They used their grief as a catalyst, determined to ensure that other young people wouldn't have to endure the same fate as their daughter. They called for stricter laws to protect vulnerable teens from predatory authority figures, laws that would create safeguards and accountability for those in positions of power. They spoke at community events, sharing Amanda's story, urging parents to have open conversations with their children about boundaries and trust. They wanted to ensure that Amanda's death would not be in vain, that her story would serve as a warning and a call to action. As the years went by, Amanda's memory remained etched in the hearts of those who knew her. The town began to heal, but the scars of betrayal ran deep. Each anniversary of her passing became a day of remembrance, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance in protecting our youth. The story of Amanda Edwards and William Douglas became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that even in the safest of places, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. For Orofino, the road to recovery would be long and painful, but Amanda's family continued to fight for justice and change, ensuring that her legacy would live on. Because in the end, it wasn't just about one tragic story. It was about creating a future where no one else would have to suffer as Amanda had. It was about transforming pain into purpose and ensuring that the darkness that had taken her life would never overshadow the light she had brought into the world. As we reflect on the tragic death of Amanda Edwards, we are confronted with the chilling reality of what can happen when power goes unchecked. Amanda was a young girl, full of dreams of becoming a photographer, of traveling the world, of making a difference. She had her whole life ahead of her, a bright future that was tragically stolen away by the very man who was sworn to protect her. This heartbreaking story serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, especially when those in positions of authority exploit their power for personal gain. Amanda's trust in Sheriff William Douglas was misplaced, a betrayal that not only cost her life, but also shattered the trust of an entire community. While justice was ultimately served with his conviction, the scars left on Orofino may never fully heal. The echoes of Amanda's laughter, her hopes and her dreams now serve as a haunting reminder of the fragility of youth and the importance of vigilance. It urges us to question the systems in place, to advocate for those who may not have a voice, and to ensure that no one else falls victim to the same fate. Her story is not just a tragedy, it's a call to action for all of us. This is the story of suffering the most, and doctors will never have the strength to atone for the. In a world where trust can be weaponized and innocence can be exploited, we must strive to protect the vulnerable, to stand up against those who misuse their power, and to create an environment where young people can thrive without fear. Amanda's legacy should inspire us all to be more aware, more protective, and more proactive in safeguarding our communities from those who would do harm. Only then can we truly honor her memory. Now we turn to you, our viewers. What do you think about this case? Was justice truly served? Or do you believe there's more to the story that remains hidden? We want to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments below. Your voices matter, and together we can create a dialogue about the issues raised in Amanda's story. And if you found this story compelling, and want to hear more tales that shine a light on the darker corners of humanity, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to light. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and stay curious.